Giovanni di Pietro di Bernardoni, known as Francis of Assisi, was an Italian mystic, poet, and Catholic friar who founded the religious order of the Franciscans. Inspired to lead a Christian life of poverty, he became a beggar and itinerant preacher. Francis of Assisi was born circa 1181, one of the children of an Italian father, Pietro di Bernardoni dei Morriconi, a prosperous silk merchant, and a French mother, Pica di Bourlemont, about whom little is known except that she was a noblewoman originally from Provence. Indulged by his parents, Francis lived the high-spirited life typical of a wealthy young man. As a youth, Francis became a devotee of troubadours and was fascinated with all things transalpine. He was handsome, witty, gallant, and delighted in fine clothes. He spent money lavishly. Although many hagiographers remark about his bright clothing, rich friends, and love of pleasures, his displays of disillusionment toward the world that surrounded him came fairly early in his life, as is shown in the story of the beggar. In this account, he was selling cloth and velvet in the marketplace on behalf of his father when a beggar came to him and asked for alms. At the conclusion of his business deal, Francis abandoned his wares and ran after the beggar. When he found him, Francis gave the man everything he had in his purse. His friends mocked him for his charity. His father scolded him in rage. Around 1202, he joined a military expedition against Perugia and was taken as a prisoner at Collestrada. He spent a year as a captive, during which an illness caused him to re-evaluate his life. However, upon his return to Assisi in 1203, Francis returned to his carefree life. In 1205, Francis left for Apulia to enlist in the army of Walter III, Count of Brienne. A strange vision made him return to Assisi and lose interest in worldly life. According to hagiographic accounts, thereafter he began to avoid the sports and feasts of his former companions. A friend asked him whether he was thinking of marrying, to which he answered, "Yes, a fairer bride than any of you have ever seen," meaning his Lady Poverty. On a pilgrimage to Rome, he joined the poor in begging at St. Peter's Basilica. He spent some time in lonely places, asking God for divine illumination. He said he had a mystical vision of Jesus Christ in the forsaken country chapel of San Damiano, just outside Assisi, in which the icon of Christ crucified said to him, "Francis, Francis, go and repair my church which, as you can see, is falling into ruins." He took this to mean the ruined church in which he was presently praying, and so he sold some cloth from his father's store to assist the priest there. When the priest refused to accept the ill-gotten gains, an indignant Francis threw the coins on the floor. In order to avoid his father's wrath, Francis hid in a cave near San Damiano for about a month. When he returned to town, hungry and dirty, he was dragged home by his father, beaten, bound, and locked in a small storeroom. Freed by his mother during Bernardoni's absence, Francis returned at once to San Damiano, where he found shelter with the officiating priest, but he was soon cited before the city consuls by his father. The latter, not content with having recovered the scattered gold from San Damiano, sought also to force his son to forego his inheritance by way of restitution. In the midst of legal proceedings before the Bishop of Assisi, Francis renounced his father and his patrimony. Some accounts report that he stripped himself naked in token of this renunciation, and the bishop covered him with his own cloak. For the next couple of months, Francis wandered as a beggar in the hills behind Assisi. He spent some time at a neighboring monastery working as a scullion. He then went to Gubbio, where a friend gave him, as an alms, the cloak, girdle, and staff of a pilgrim. Returning to Assisi, he traversed the city, begging stones for the restoration of St. Damiano. These he carried to the old chapel, set in place himself, and so at length rebuilt it. Over the course of 2 years, he embraced the life of a penitent, during which he restored several ruined chapels in the countryside around Assisi, among them San Pietro in Spina, in the area of San Petrinano in the valley about a kilometer from River Torto, today on private property and once again in ruin, and the Porziuncola, the little chapel of St. Mary of the Angels in the plain just below the town. This later became his favorite abode. By degrees he took to nursing lepers, in the leper colonies near Assisi. One morning in February 1208, Francis was taking part in a mass in the chapel of St. Mary of the Angels, near which he had by then built himself a hut. The gospel of the day was the commissioning of the 12, from the book of Matthew. The disciples were to go and proclaim that the kingdom of God is at hand. Francis was inspired to devote himself to a life of poverty. Having obtained a coarse woolen tunic, The dress then worn by the poorest Umbrian peasants, he tied it around himself with a knotted rope and went about exhorting the people of the countryside to penance, brotherly love, and peace. Francis's preaching to ordinary people was unusual as he had no license to do so. His example attracted others. Within a year Francis had 11 followers. The brothers lived a simple life in the deserted leper colony of Rivo Torto near Assisi. They spent much of their time wandering through the mountainous districts of Umbria, making a deep impression upon their hearers by their earnest exhortations. In 1209 he composed a simple rule for his followers, friars, the regula primitiva or primitive rule, which came from verses in the Bible. The rule was to follow the teachings of our Lord Jesus Christ and to walk in his footsteps. He then led 11 followers to Rome to seek permission from Pope Innocent III to found a new religious order. Upon entry to Rome, the brothers encountered Bishop Guido of Assisi, who had in his company Giovanni di San Paolo, the Cardinal Bishop of Sabina. The cardinal, who was the confessor of Pope Innocent III, was immediately sympathetic to Francis and agreed to represent Francis to the Pope. After several days, the Pope agreed to admit the group informally, adding that when God increased the group in grace and number, they could return for an official audience. The group was tonsured. This was important in part because it recognized church authority and prevented his following from accusations of heresy, as had happened to the Waldensians decades earlier. Though a number of the Pope's councillors considered the mode of life proposed by Francis to be unsafe and impractical, following a dream in which he saw Francis holding up the Lateran Basilica, he decided to endorse Francis's order. This occurred, according to tradition, on the 16th of April 1210, and constituted the official founding of the Franciscan Order. The group, then the Lesser Brothers, Order of Friars Minor, also known as the Franciscan Order or the Seraphic Order, were centered in the Portiuncula and preached first in Umbria, before expanding throughout Italy. Francis was later ordained a deacon, but not a priest. From then on, the new order grew quickly. Hearing Francis preaching in the church of San Rufino in Assisi in 1211, the young noblewoman Clare of Assisi sought to live like them. Her cousin Rufino also sought to join. On the night of Palm Sunday, the 28th of March 1212, Clare clandestinely left her family's palace. Francis received her at the Portiuncula and thereby established the Order of Poor Clares. He gave Clare a religious habit, a garment similar to his own, before lodging her, her younger sister Caterina, and other young women in a nearby monastery of Benedictine nuns until he could provide a suitable monastery. Later he transferred them to San Damiano, to a few small huts or cells. This became the first monastery of the Second Franciscan Order, now known as Poor Clares. For those who could not leave their affairs, Francis later formed the Third Order of Brothers and Sisters of Penance, a fraternity composed of either laity or clergy whose members neither withdrew from the world nor took religious vows. Instead, they observed the principles of Franciscan life in the daily lives. Before long, the Third Order, now titled the Secular Franciscan Order, grew beyond Italy. Determined to bring the gospel to all peoples and let God convert them, Francis sought on several occasions to take his message out of Italy. In approximately 1211, a captain of the Medrano family held the lordship of the castle and town of Agoncillo, situated near the city of Logrono, in the region of La Rioja, Spain. Medrano's son was suffering from a mysterious and untreatable ailment. In 1211, Saint Francis of Assisi roamed those very parts of Agoncillo. In a saintly manner, he visited Medrano's Agoncillo castle, placed his mystical hands upon the ailing Medrano boy, and miraculously healed him, securing the Medrano lineage in Agoncillo. As a result, the Medrano family are distinguished by the devotion to Saint Francis of Assisi. The Medrano family generously donated some land, including a tower, situated close to the Ebro River within the city of Logrono as a gift to Saint Francis, where he established the first Spanish convent of his order there. Unfortunately, despite its centuries-long legacy of glory and sanctity, the convent met its demise in the 19th century. Today, the remnants of its walls still remain. In the late spring of 1212, he set out for Jerusalem, but was shipwrecked by a storm on the Dalmatian coast, forcing him to return to Italy. On the 8th of May 1213, he was given the use of the mountain of Alverna, as a gift from Count Orlando di Chiusi, who described it as eminently suitable for whoever wishes to do penance in a place remote from mankind. The mountain would become one of his favorite retreats for prayer. During the Fifth Crusade in 1219, Francis went to Egypt, where a Crusader army had been encamped for over a year besieging the walled city of Damietta. He was accompanied by Friar Illuminatus of Ars and hoped to convert the Sultan of Egypt or be martyred in the attempt. The Sultan, Al-Kamil, a nephew of Saladin, had succeeded his father as Sultan of Egypt in 1218 and was encamped upstream of Damietta. A bloody and futile attack on the city was launched by the Christians on the 29th of August 1219, following which both sides agreed to a ceasefire that lasted 4 weeks. 33, probably during this interlude Francis and his companion crossed the Muslims' lines and were brought before the Sultan, remaining in his camp for a few days. Reports give no information about what transpired during the encounter beyond noting that the Sultan received Francis graciously and that Francis preached to the Muslims. He returned unharmed. No known Arab sources mention the visit. Such an incident is alluded to in a scene in the late 13th century fresco cycle, attributed to Giotto, in the Upper Basilica at Assisi. According to some late sources, the Sultan gave Francis permission to visit the sacred places in the Holy Land and even to preach there. All that can safely be asserted is that Francis and his companion left the Crusader camp for Acre, from where they embarked for Italy in the latter half of 1220. Drawing on a 1267 sermon by Bonaventure, later sources report that the Sultan secretly converted or accepted a deathbed baptism as a result of meeting Francis. Whatever transpired as a result of Francis's and Al-Kamil's meeting, the Franciscans have maintained a presence in the Holy Land almost uninterruptedly since 1217 and remain there today. They received concessions from the Mameluke Sultan in 1333 with regard to certain holy places in Jerusalem and Bethlehem, and, so far as concerns the Catholic Church, jurisdictional privileges from Pope Clement VI in 1342. The growing order of friars was divided into provinces. Groups were sent to France, Germany, Hungary, and Spain and to the east. Upon receiving a report of the martyrdom of 5 brothers in Morocco, Francis returned to Italy via Venice. Cardinal Ugolino di Conti was then nominated by the Pope as the protector of the order. Another reason for Francis's return to Italy was that the Franciscan Order had grown at an unprecedented rate compared to previous religious orders, but its organizational sophistication had not kept up with this growth and had little more to govern it than Francis's example and simple rule. To address this problem, Francis prepared a new and more detailed rule, the First Rule, or Rule without a papal bull, Regula Prima, Regula non bullata, which again asserted devotion to poverty and the apostolic life. However, it also introduced a greater institutional structure, though this was never officially endorsed by the Pope. Brother Peter was succeeded by Brother Elias as Vicar of Francis. 2 years later, Francis modified the First Rule, creating the Second Rule, or Rule with a Bull, which was approved by Pope Honorius III on the 29th of November 1223. As the order's official rule, it called on the friars to observe the holy gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ, living in obedience without anything of our own and in chastity. In addition, it set regulations for discipline, preaching, and entering the order. Once the rule was endorsed by the Pope, Francis withdrew increasingly from external affairs. During 1221 and 1222, he crossed Italy, first as far south as Catania in Sicily and afterwards as far north as Bologna. While he was praying on the mountain of Verna, during a 40-day fast in preparation for Michaelmas, the 29th of September, Francis is said to have had a vision on or about the 13th of September 1224, the feast of the exaltation of the cross, as a result of which he received the Stigmata. Brother Leo, who had been with Francis at the time, left a clear and simple account of the event, the first definite account of the phenomenon of Stigmata. Suddenly he saw a vision of a seraph, a 6-winged angel on a cross. This angel gave him the gift of the 5 wounds of Christ. Suffering from these stigmata and from trachoma, Francis received care in several cities, Siena, Cortona, Nocera, to no avail. He began to go blind and the Bishop of Ostia ordered that his eyes be operated on, which meant cauterizing the eyes with hot irons. Francis claims to have felt nothing at all when this was done. In the end, he was brought back to a hut next to the Porziuncola. Here he spent his last days dictating his spiritual testament. He died on the evening of Saturday, the 3rd of October 1226, singing Psalm 141, Voce mea ad Dominum. On the 16th of July 1228, he was declared a saint by Pope Gregory IX, the former Cardinal Ugolino di Conti, a friend of Francis and Cardinal Protector of the Order. The next day, the Pope laid the foundation stone for the Basilica of St. Francis in Assisi. Francis was buried on the 25th of May 1230, under the lower basilica, but his tomb was soon hidden on orders of Brother Elias, in order to protect it from Saracen invaders. His burial place remained unknown until it was rediscovered in 1818. Pasquale Belli then constructed a crypt for the remains in the lower basilica. It was refashioned between 1927 and 1930 into its present form by Ugo Tarchi. In 1978, the remains of Francis were examined and confirmed by a commission of scholars appointed by Pope Paul VI, and put into a glass urn in the ancient stone tomb. In 1935, Drive. Edward Frederick Hartung concluded that Francis contracted trachoma while in Egypt and died of quartan malaria. This data was published in the Annals of Medical History. Francis preached the Christian doctrine that the world was created good and beautiful by God but suffers a need for redemption because of human sin. As someone who saw God reflected in nature, Saint Francis was a great lover of God's creation. In the Canticle of the Sun he gives God thanks for brother sun, sister moon, brother wind, water, fire, and earth, all of which he sees as rendering praise to God. Many of the stories that surround the life of Francis say that he had a great love for animals and the environment. The Fioriti, Little Flowers, is a collection of legends and folklore that sprang up after his death. One account describes how one day, while Francis was traveling with some companions, they happened upon a place in the road where birds filled the trees on either side. Francis told his companions to wait for me while I go to preach to my sisters the birds. The birds surrounded him, intrigued by the power of his voice, and not one of them flew away. He is often portrayed with a bird, typically in his hand. Another legend from the Fioriti tells that in the city of Gubbio, where Francis lived for some time, was a wolf, terrifying and ferocious, who devoured men as well as animals. Francis went up into the hills, and when he found the wolf, he made the sign of the cross and commanded the wolf to come to him and hurt no one. Then Francis led the wolf into the town, and surrounded by startled citizens made a pact between them and the wolf. Because the wolf had done evil out of hunger, the townsfolk were to feed the wolf regularly. In return, the wolf would no longer prey upon them or their flocks. In this manner Gubbio was freed from the menace of the predator. On the 29th of November 1979, Pope John Paul II declared Francis the patron saint of ecology. On the 28th of March 1982, John Paul II said that Francis's love and care for creation was a challenge for contemporary Catholics and a reminder not to behave like dissident predators where nature is concerned, but to assume responsibility for it, taking all care so that everything stays healthy and integrated, so as to offer a welcoming and friendly environment even to those who succeed us. 58. The same Pope wrote on the occasion of the World Day of Peace, the 1st of January 1990, that Francis invited all of creation, animals, plants, natural forces, even brother sun and sister moon, to give honor and praise to the Lord. The poor man of Assisi gives us striking witness that when we are at peace with God we are better able to devote ourselves to building up that peace with all creation which is inseparable from peace among all peoples. In 2015, Pope Francis published his encyclical Letter Laudato Si, about the ecological crisis and care for our common home, which takes its name from the Canticle of the Sun, which Francis of Assisi composed. It presents Francis as the example par excellence of care for the vulnerable and of an integral ecology lived out joyfully and authentically. This inspired the birth of the Laudato Si movement, a global network of nearly 1,000 organizations promoting the Laudato Si message and the Franciscan approach to ecology.
On the 18th of June 1939, Pope Pius XII named Francis a joint patron saint of Italy along with Catherine of Siena with the apostolic letter, Licet Commissa. Francis is the patron of animals and ecology. 77. As such, he is the patron saint of the Laudato Si movement, a network that promotes the Franciscan ecological paradigm as outlined in the encyclical Laudato Si. 78. He is also considered the patron against dying alone, citation needed, against fire, patron of the Franciscan Order and Catholic Action, of families, peace, and needleworkers, and a number of religious congregations. It is a popular practice on his feast day, the 4th of October, for people to bring their pets and other animals to church for a blessing.